Since identities are tied to our faces, it's only natural that you'd see a lot of characters running around whose visual gimmicks are based around something unique on or around their faces. We've already talked a lot about Hush, a guy whose design is based around bandages wrapped around his head, concealing his identity. Then you have someone tied to Hush's origins, Red Hood, whose signature design element, like his name suggests, is the red hood that conceals his face, his identity, who he really is underneath. What if someone saw that mask as their identity, foregoing who they were born as, who they were raised to be, who they are physically, to embrace a new life they decided for themselves? Using that new identity to give them strength and intimidation, allowing them to demand the respect they felt they were denied before. That's the original gimmick behind the villain Black Mask, who first appeared in Batman 386 in 1985. You probably know him most for being one of, if not the biggest crime lords in Gotham, with a skull for a face and a fondness for torture. But he started as a much different character, and detailing that evolution is one of the things I want to showcase today. Try to keep track of whether his face is supposed to have a mask on it, or if that's supposed to be his skin, and what color his face or mask is meant to be as time goes on. His first comic makes hefty promises, trying to sell him as crazier than the Joker and deadlier than Ra's al Ghul. This isn't your grandma's Batman villain, this is a villain for the 80s, supposedly pushing the envelope even further to fit with the excess that decade was known for. It's always funny how older comics start with an introduction to a new villain before they've actually appeared in the story itself. Almost like they're letting you know this is your cue to start getting hyped for this character, even though you have no idea who they are. Imagine if Hush debuted like this in the first page of his story arc before the mystery even got going. If you're not already familiar with Black Mask's origin story, you're not gonna believe this. The first page details how he was born, foreshadowing things by noting that the first thing he saw was a doctor in a mask. And then he was dropped on his head. This causes him to grow up with emotional development problems, having him force a mask pretending to be a happy child. His name is Roman Sionis, and he's the heir to the successful Janus Cosmetics company. Fittingly, Janus is a Roman god usually depicted as having two faces pointing in opposite directions, who among other things represents the concept of duality. Life and death, beginning and ending. These are ideas that will soon define Roman's character. This origin is full of face puns, with his mom saying she needs to put her face on, he hates watching his parents put a mask on around their rich friends, and losing face is not only the name of this issue, but also key to his downward spiral. While he wasn't necessarily friends with Bruce Wayne as a kid, they did know each other growing up since their parents were friends. He ends up going on summer vacation to the woods where he runs away into the wilderness hoping to never come back. He finds a raccoon, drawing parallels between himself and the fact that this is an animal trapped behind a lifelong mask. Now, being dropped on his head wasn't enough of a justification for why he grew up to be a villain. Instead, this raccoon, which apparently has rabies, bites his hand, sending him into a panic. This draws in mosquitoes, who bite his eyes, swelling them shut and causing him to trip over a tree and fall. This insane sequence of events causes him to imagine being dragged to hell, an experience that felt like it lasted forever before he was found and given medical attention. This caused him to become even more separated from our reality, with even his parents noticing he'd become even stranger than before. Apparently, his mother kept the fact that he was dropped on his head under wraps to protect their family name, even keeping Roman's father from suing the doctor for malpractice. As an adult, he managed to rise up the ranks in his family's company, supposedly without the help of his parents. There, he fell in love with a small-time model named Cersei, who his parents disapproved of him marrying since she wasn't famous or rich enough. So they team up to murder his parents just like that, by starting a fire in their summer home. The plan is a total success, and he becomes the head of their cosmetics company, but immediately begins running it into the ground due to his own skewed perspective. He makes Cersei the head of a new line of face paint style makeup, claiming people don't want to highlight their own features but cover their faces in a mask of their own making. He focuses all of the company's resources towards this new product, but it's a total failure, causing their customers to move towards their competition in droves. To save his company, he offers anyone in his R&D department a $100,000 bonus if they can come up with something revolutionary to recapture the market. One of them offers a new waterproof line of makeup, which he immediately puts into production even though it still requires a good deal of testing. Initially, it's a huge success, but eventually causes skin conditions like rashes on people using it, resulting in a wave of lawsuits and the product being banned. Now they're on the brink of bankruptcy with everyone blaming Roman. Even Cersei leaves him in a public display, causing him to lose face in front of his employees. To add insult to injury, Wayne Enterprises bails them out, on the condition that they get to assign their own board of directors, essentially icing Roman out of the decision-making process of his company and relegating him to the position of owner and figurehead. Most people probably wouldn't have a problem with this, but because Roman is so conceited and unable to take responsibility for causing this mess with his own choices, he gets angry. He goes to his parents' tomb, and after being struck by lightning, he smashes open his father's wooden black coffin with a rock. He starts going insane during this whole sequence, apparently babbling and drooling for 5 hours straight, and eventually chiseling the wood into a mask for himself. He curses his life and his identity, and uses the mask to transform himself into a new persona, Black Mask, and begins recruiting criminals to work for him who he forces to wear masks as well. He calls his group the False Face Society of Gotham, claiming that by wearing a mask, your original personality is overwritten by one that unlocks your primal instincts and removes your inhibitions. He secretly takes his own personal collection of masks for use in his gang, and steals a supply of the banned chemical he ruined his company with. While the common members of the False Face Society go around committing petty crimes for profit, his main goal is targeting the new board of directors put in place by Wayne Enterprises. He ties them up, puts a hefty amount of the chemical onto a mask, and leaves it on their face overnight so that by the time they're found, it's killed them and permanently disfigured their faces in the shape of the mask. Batman learns of Black Mask's operation after taking out some of his gang members on the street. The issue is that as soon as Batman finds the first board member killed with the chemical, he knows Black Mask is Roman Sionis, since he disappeared and the reason behind these people being targeted is too obvious. I would have liked it to be a mystery for a bit longer, but Batman already knows his identity in the very same issue he debuted in. There's an interesting contrast between Batman and Black Mask since they're both people with dual identities, except Black Mask actually sees his normal form as Roman to be a different person, someone he despises for being so weak. Black Mask hates Bruce Wayne for causing him to lose face, but doesn't know he's Batman. Meanwhile, Batman knows Roman and Black Mask are the same person, but just doesn't know where he operates from. While this original design isn't what Black Mask is most famous for nowadays, I actually like it a lot. The yellow-orange suit looks really cool contrasting with his mask and gloves, which are colored more blue in the comics themselves. He thinks he's absorbing the spirit energy of the mask itself, becoming death incarnate. By killing these new executives, he's hurting the stock value of his former company, which has the potential to damage Wayne Enterprises' worth as well, and by extension, Batman's operation, which is obviously funded by Wayne's own wealth. Black Mask decides to get even with Cersei, who he feels betrayed him, returning the favor by using the same methods to mutilate her face, the one thing she valued most. He lets her live with this new visage, traumatizing her to the point of wearing a mask to hide behind, and staying with him as his queen, again out of fear. Bruce decides to set a trap by hosting a mask-themed party at his mansion, and even though he expects Black Mask to be suspicious, he knows he still won't be able to resist. They psychoanalyze one another, with Black Mask making a lot of negative assumptions about Bruce, since he lacks the context of him being Batman. He chooses to show up, but under a different mask so he isn't instantly spotted. Once again, we draw comparison to the god Janus, as he wears a mask with two opposite expressions. One issue I have with Black Mask is that he has a lot of overlap with Two-Face conceptually. The big difference is that he isn't permanently disfigured with two personalities at once, but one at a time depending on whether or not he's wearing a mask. The masquerade is a fun concept because you have all of these established characters hiding in the crowd. Roman knocks a guy out and switches masks with him before getting Bruce alone in his garden where he tries to kill him. He ends up failing but takes off running back to his base in the cemetery to get his real mask, allowing him to transform himself mentally into the more powerful Black Mask. Luckily, Jason Todd's able to follow him and give Batman the location of his hideout. Black Mask sends his men after them and decides he needs to kill his previous self completely. He heads to his childhood home and laments how empty his childhood was, even though he was surrounded by colorful toys. The one time he let Roman try to beat Bruce, he lost. But he can justify things to himself by claiming Black Mask has never failed. And now Roman must die for being such a weak liability. With the Roman side of him dead, he can truly become death incarnate. So he decides to send him to hell to join his parents, by lighting the room and his old possessions on fire. All of these theatrics are only going on in his head, as he's only able to convince himself he's become a soulless demon for a moment, before he's overtaken by surprise and fear from seeing all of his men defeated. He's a coward at his core, so he takes off running into the fire. Batman tries to save him by catching him with a wired batarang, but he's pinned by falling wood. It presses his face down into the burning toys he was trying to get rid of, and even though Batman jumps in himself to free him, the damage is done. His face is so severely burned from having his mask cooked into it, that even when they remove it, his face now permanently resembles it, representing the idea that whatever humanity he had left as Roman is now gone because of his actions. The logic behind this moment tends to change as time goes on, with some interpretations of the character having the mask permanently fuse with his face so he can't take it off. But here you can definitely tell it's supposed to be his skin we're looking at, since it's rendered with a much different texture, and we can also see his hair and the area around his eyes much clearer. He's taken to Arkham Asylum to rot, while Cersei returns the mask he gave her, freeing herself from his control and choosing not to live life hiding like he did. As far as origin stories go, Black Mask's was strangely convoluted at the start with his absurd experiences as a child. Everything else with him being too prideful to admit his mistakes and lashing out due to feeling like he was humiliated makes sense to justify his vendetta. Masks are a really cool theme and gimmick, and something about the name and concept of the False Face Society of Gotham just works aesthetically. I think targeting Wayne Enterprises and having a burning hatred for Bruce more so than Batman creates an interesting dynamic that lets him stand out from other villains. Like I said, one issue is how the character struggles to find his own lane to shine in when Two-Face already exists. But what were the two things I mentioned that gave him a unique angle? His two identities that changed depending on whether he was wearing the mask or not, which were independent but at odds with one another, and the fact that he didn't have a permanent glaring abnormality. This allowed Roman to go out and act on his own without drawing attention to himself compared to Two-Face. The issue is that by the end of this origin story, both of those aspects are removed. He now no longer has the separate personality of Roman, and does have a permanent disfigurement in the form of his charred face. I feel like these aspects had storytelling potential, and we're kinda missing out on those by removing them after his first storyline. So from now on, does he even need a mask anymore, or is his Black Mask just gonna be his actual damaged face? Well, the next time he gets a mention is in Detective Comics 566 from 1986, where Batman gets an ominous message telling him to know his foes. Really, it's just an excuse for Batman to go through his computer and catch the audience up on his various villains. They confirm he's still in Arkham Asylum, but leading off of this in Batman 400, it's revealed that the message was sent by Ra's al Ghul, who was thought to have died in a previous story. He frees all of Batman's villains from Arkham Asylum, including Black Mask, who is explained to still be at large by the end of the story. He's in the same pose he was left in at the end of his first appearance, but this time you can see his face isn't black like his mask. Maybe they realized having a white guy in blackface was a bit of an awkward choice. Or maybe it was just a coloring mistake and never intended by the writer. In that bio I mentioned earlier, it says his face is scarred to be the negative of his mask. So I'd assume they're trying to say it's now the same shape, but not the same color. Apparently, this is the last story of Batman to take place on Earth 1, before the different universes were combined to create New Earth as a result of the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Whether Black Mask ended up getting arrested again or was never freed at all is up in the air, since he doesn't appear again until a story called The Last Arkham from 1992, which is the first storyline for a series called Shadow of the Bat. The new head of Arkham Asylum, Jeremiah Arkham, wants to teach Batman a lesson in humiliation, and sets things up so all of his enemies can gang up on him at once, including Black Mask. He's just one attacker in a sea of many, so nothing too noteworthy. During the prelude to Nightfall, one of the longest Batman storylines from the 90s, where Bane is working behind the scenes to break down Batman's mind and body, Black Mask, who escaped from Arkham yet again, is one of the many villains he faces that leads to his eventual defeat by Bane's hands. Starting in Batman 484, also from 1992, he re-established himself as a threat, this time burning down various businesses owned by Wayne's company as a way to get back at him. This was the first time I saw his classic design, and I thought his introduction in front of this wall of masks was really striking. The artist for this issue draws characters to be really wide, which actually feels like it fits his design well. Here, we learn that if you're someone with tattoos or piercings all over your face, he considers that enough of a mask so that you don't need another one over your head. Once again, I'm confused by the logic of whether or not he's wearing a mask or that's his actual face, since he calls it a permanent mask burned into his face. Unless he's saying his own scarred face is like a mask and he still chooses to wear a mask over it anyway. He could be wearing the mask, but combined with his growing delusion, could be perceiving the mask as his actual face. He burns down his original base of operations in the crypt of his family and moves things to some random house. When Batman recounts Black Mask's origin story to Tim Drake, the third Robin who has yet to face him, we get to see the mask and his face in the same shot, making it clear that his actual face was burned into the shape of the mask. Batman calls him faceless and maskless, but forever masked by his face, which really gives the impression that he doesn't wear an actual mask anymore, since his face is burned to be the mask. His men find Cersei again living in the streets, looking at a magazine, mourning the life that was stolen from her. They give her her mask back and bring her back to him, where he makes her dress up in lingerie, comparing her to a real mannequin. To prevent more arson cases, Batman comes up with the idea to go undercover and join his gang, where he's given a mask and named Skullface. He's taken to the next place they plan on burning down, but he switches to his actual costume and knocks them all out. Black Mask wonders why only Skullface made it out unharmed, but doesn't care because a new hostage has arrived, Lucius Fox, one of the top executives at Wayne Enterprises. He's already bleeding, and Black Mask smears his blood on his face like war paint, stating he's waging war on Wayne. He wants Skullface to torture Fox to get information out of him, and a love for torture would go on to define the character in later appearances, even though he doesn't seem that interested in it here. They're getting suspicious of Skullface being a cop, so they decide to see how he'll react when they use the usual tactic on Fox, with a mask covered in the old banned chemical. Of course, he has to blow his cover to try to save him, and realizing Skullface is Bruce Wayne, he prepares to blow a hole in his head, before Cersei jumps in and saves him. He hits her with the butt of his gun and then escapes to some docks along the water. He cheers his man on as he fights Batman, but once he sees him get defeated, he takes a dive into the water to escape. The cops pull out a body they think is Black Mask, but it's actually another Wayne Enterprise executive they killed earlier in the story and dressed up to look like him. Gordon says it isn't burned on like Black Mask's, but instead tattooed on. The real Black Mask is still at large, as we see years later in Detective Comics 684 from 1995. He has a meeting with his competition, a guy named Dirty Doyle, who throws his cigar at him. He doesn't realize his own men have already been bought, turning around to see them wearing masks and then getting shot to death on the spot. Branching off of this is a storyline from the same year starting in Batman 518 with really great pencils by Kelly Jones. His organization now has the most members in the history of Gotham's underworld, at least according to him, and he has his men stealing masks from museums for his collection. They seem to have finally settled on a look for his actual face, as he removes his mask, revealing it's just horribly scarred. Like Two-Face, except it's his entire face. At this point, he's gone off the deep end. So obsessed with Cersei that he's making grand speeches to a mannequin that he's convinced is her. At first, I thought they just changed her face to be featureless, which is sort of an interesting angle and contrast with Black Mask himself. But the mannequin never moves poses throughout this story, and later it gets its face blown off when an assassin misses his real target. That assassin is a guy calling himself the Black Spider who wants to join the False Facers, but is really working for a rival gang leader to get close enough to kill Black Mask. To prove himself, he needs to crash another masquerade happening at Wayne Manor and kill one of his guests. But Bruce manages to stop any of them from becoming victims and then beats up Black Spider in the woods. Since he screwed up the hit, he's just gonna go ahead and kill Black Mask from the shadows. But Batman manages to stop him. He decides the assassin is the more pressing threat, allowing Black Mask to escape back into the streets, and he isn't able to find him when hunting him down later on. This storyline isn't anything major for Black Mask as a character, but it was great to see his original design rendered in so much detail. He's written to have much more of a burning hatred for his father, even seeing him in his own reflection, causing him to smash a mirror. He even states he hated Bruce even as a kid, which I think is new information to add to his vendetta. It makes you wonder how this guy even runs a functioning business normally, since he spends all of his time alone, repeatedly bloviating to a mannequin who isn't even listening. The problem with the character is that he was basically just treated as a generic mob boss for the next few years. He'd appear in things like Green Arrow issue 105 in 1996, just trying to buy some kind of high-tech plasma gun. We get a glimpse into Black Mask's expanding operations into the city of Bloodhaven in Nightwing #1 that same year. His guys are attempting to steal the eggs for in vitro fertilization from a crime boss and his wife, but Nightwing manages to save them. They were planning to hold them ransom, but we see Black Mask yelling at his men over the phone for failing. In Detective Comics 697, again from the same year, he's involved in a small plot revolving around a new villain called Lockup who's actually adapted from the Batman animated series. He's this guy who thinks justice isn't tough enough, so he goes around abducting criminals and securing them in his own hidden prison, where he can make sure they stay under extreme conditions. Batman gets a random member of Black Mask's gang to squeal in exchange for his freedom, in a ploy to bait Lockup into snatching him, knowing he wouldn't allow this guy to walk free after his crimes. Simultaneously, Black Mask himself catches wind of this guy squealing, so he sends his own men in there to execute him for daring to cross him. It's kind of a catch-22, because even after the cops catch Lockup, he can leverage his freedom because he won't tell anyone the location of his prison, where everyone's gonna starve to death if he doesn't return. Black Mask isn't actually involved in the rest of this plot, but Lockup will be relevant again soon. In 1998, they decided to shake up Batman's world in a crossover called Cataclysm, where a major earthquake hit Gotham, devastating the city. They released a one-shot called Batman Bullock's Law the next year, but because it's supposed to take place during this time frame and before the next big event, I'll just discuss it now. Harvey Bullock is this long-running detective known for bumbling around but being a hard-ass who's always eating something. He takes down a false facer, which annoys Black Mask, and in an effort to get him freed, he offers up a disc containing dirt on his various rivals in the Gotham underworld. Bullock uses the info to make a bunch of high-profile arrests, even posing as a false facer himself to bust up a drug lab. His contact for Black Mask is this guy who smokes through his frog mask, which is pretty funny looking. The bright colors in this comic, mixed with all of the masks and violence, really gives me Hotline Miami vibes, which is an aesthetic that Black Mask probably could have leaned into more. Either way, Bullock finds a way to play both sides, getting all of the false facers killed after they torture him, and even getting out of his physical exam so he doesn't have to stop eating donuts. Ho ho! Even though people are aware that Black Mask went through a significant character design shift around the beginning of the 2000s, I've never heard anyone point to the actual moment this happened and why it was done. Since the character was floundering and not being used for anything unique or interesting, they probably thought the potential of his original gimmick was tapped out and he was in need of a switch-up. In the aftermath of that Cataclysm storyline followed another one that lasted throughout 1999 called No Man's Land, where the city was closed off from the outside world and abandoned by the government. Gotham was no longer considered part of the United States, while the citizens inside needed to fight for their survival every day. So basically, our heroes are presented with a ton of new problems now that society has collapsed, with crime being taken to a new level. Starting in Batman 565, there's a two-part storyline called Mosaic, where Black Mask returns in this totally different setting. We see him literally burn his old design in a trash fire, as he goes on about how Gotham's destruction has shattered everyone's false identities, and now there's no room for masks. He's now the cult leader of a group aiming to convert people into their ranks by force, under the mantra that they need to accept their true face and see the light. He wants to take over Wayne Tower since it represents old Gotham, but this puts him at odds with the remaining police and masked crime fighters, who he now hates more because they're hiding their faces. So he's basically switched his gimmick completely, going from someone who believes in the spiritual power a mask can give you to make you something greater, to one who despises masks and wants everyone to show their true face and accept their nothing deep down. Even though the art style for these issues is grungy and a little abstract, I can only assume Black Mask no longer wears his mask, since his head and body share the same color. He now just resembles Skullface from MGS5, because of the scars he got from being burned, alongside being incredibly malnourished. His tank top and the holster on his chest is kind of a cool look, but it's such a dramatic shift in design, obviously meant to show how dire the situation is in Gotham. He seems to have a spiral tattoo on his shoulder, likely meant to represent his cult, which the others have on their forehead. This is the first time we see him engage in torturing someone himself, with a heated up piece of metal, something he likely does a lot to break people down so they join him. His false face society and its philosophy always had a bit of a cult-like feel to it, so I suppose this is just taking the concept even further. The issue is that he really doesn't do anything during his appearance here. He's swiftly defeated by Cassandra Cain, the newly introduced Batgirl from this era. She beats him and his gang, making sure to brutalize him enough to make sure no one wants to follow him again. After trying to get Batman to remove his mask, he says he's free now that he doesn't have his. It's an interesting concept because his obsession with the mask drove him insane, yet losing it has him acting even more unhinged. Batman takes him to Blackgate, which is now run by Lockup, since he's the best man to handle a prison operation of that scale in this lawless wasteland. Since he's now behind bars, he reappears in the pages of Nightwing starting in issue 35, when Batman enlists Nightwing to help take Blackgate back from Lockup's brutal control. We see Black Mask at the start being escorted, and I can't imagine anyone looking at this design and thinking it's an improvement over what we had. Of course, this is partially due to how he's rendered in this art style, but he just looks like a generic ghoul. Nightwing gets captured and thrown to the wolves. And I just have to note that plenty of these characters seem to have black masks or look like zombies, kinda calling his uniqueness into question in each rendition. Black Mask comes in to protect Nightwing, suggesting they let him live to gain the favor of Batman so that they might be able to escape the prison. Come on, I already said this guy looked like Skullface now, but he even mentions having a lust for revenge here. If you remember his second storyline, Skullface was even the name he gave to the undercover Bruce Wayne, so this stuff is getting way too coincidental. Anyway, Nightwing is luckily able to use the help of these villains to escape, but makes sure to ditch them before they can make it out themselves. Eventually, order and the status quo is returned back to Gotham and things are cleaned up. But because Black Mask was liberated from the thing that gave him his name, surely we're gonna be seeing a very different character from now on. Well, not quite, because the next time we see him is in Catwoman's solo series from 2002, where he has his old design again like nothing happened. I'm gonna assume this was just because the artist didn't get the memo that his design was changing, because when he appears again 5 issues later, he's rocking the skull look again. And this, combined with the white shirt and black tie, kinda goes on to be his signature look moving forward. The stage is set earlier in the comic before he makes his presence known. At first, Catwoman messes with the drug operations of one of Black Mask's top men, getting a low-level drug dealer to turn against him, and exposing corrupt cops who were working with him to trade drugs for diamonds. She ends up stealing those diamonds and selling them for $28 million, and putting that money back into helping the East End of Gotham by building a community center. The fact that she's standing in the way of Black Mask's operations in that part of the city annoys him greatly, so he begins working on destroying her life. The first time we get a good look at this version of him is in Catwoman's Secret Files, which came out between issues 10 and 11 and ties into the series itself. He's torturing this guy trying to find out where his diamonds went, and he starts giving us his new perspective on things. He says he was only obsessed with masks because of what was done to his face, which is much different from his origin story, where his obsession with masks is what caused him to chisel one and get it burned into his skin. What came first, the chicken or the egg, the mask obsession or the mutilation itself? Then he started reading about the Spanish Inquisition, realizing torture is like an art form, and that the way his face was destroyed was basically a form of torture he survived. So now he accepts his disfigured face as a sign of his strong will, proving his ability to survive anything thrown at him. The torture he performed in No Man's Land was implied to have a purpose behind it, to break people down and convert them to his cult. But here he just admits he enjoys watching people suffer. While No Man's Land was the first time he had a skull-like appearance because he discarded his mask, this is the first time he has that look paired with his entire head actually being black like his name would suggest. This is similar to the end of his very first storyline where he was left in Arkham Asylum with his face permanently burned black. But for a while they were still going with the logic that his face was misshapen from the scarring caused by the mask's imprint, but his face was still his original skin color. I'm almost certain his new look here in Catwoman is supposed to be his actual face, except with the burns being so extreme that he no longer has lips or a nose. This is corroborated by his bio from the same Secret Files issue, which plainly states that he discarded the ebony mask in favor of embracing his true appearance. It also states he focuses on destroying people's faces when he tortures them, maybe out of a deep sense of envy or to prove they can't survive what he endured. There were 3 other bios like this released for him throughout the years, so I might as well show them here. The first one was from 1993's Who's Who in the DC Universe, which showcases his original, more sleek-looking suit and the crypt he used to operate out of. We also get another rendering of the incident with the fire where he was first burned. The second bio was in 1998's Batman Villain's Secret Files, where we get to see the wider mob boss rendition of the character. The last one comes from the 2005 version of this secret file, where we see his modern, torture fanatic persona. I want to bring this up because all of them mention the fact that he made his mask out of his father's coffin except that last one, where they retcon it to be his mother's coffin. Not sure why they thought that was a necessary change, especially when he was previously characterized as having a grudge towards his dad and not his mom. Back in the actual Catwoman comic, he starts his plan by freeing an old friend of hers turned enemy from prison, to get information on her true identity and help destroy her. So right after her community center has its grand opening, he blows the entire place up, destroying a symbol of Catwoman trying to turn her life around and do good in the world. At the same time, he kidnaps Catwoman's sister and her husband, torturing both of them. He goes so far that he scoops her husband's eye out and forces her to eat it. He isn't even trying to get information out of them, he just wants to watch them suffer, taking something away from Catwoman like she took away from him. His men also perform a hit and run, attempting to kill her friend Holly, first introduced in Frank Miller's Batman Year One prequel. But instead, they end up severely hurting a private eye named Slam Bradley, a legacy character from the very first issue of Detective Comics before Batman himself was even introduced. They kidnap Holly instead, so when Catwoman finally finds Black Mask's penthouse suite, he's able to hold her hostage to get Catwoman to back down. He shows her the result of his torture sessions, with her sister being driven insane from eating her own husband's eye and said husband dying in the process. He offers to let both Holly and her sister go if she agrees to replace them as his next subject. She agrees, chaining herself up, but he immediately shows how much of a duplicitous scumbag he really is when he tells his men to kill the 2 women he just agreed to free. He asks what he ever did to give her the idea that she could trust him, and she responds saying that she never did, detonating explosives around the tower and breaking her chains and whipping him across the head with them. He's set on fire in the scuffle, which must be one of his biggest fears, but he runs out and holds Holly at gunpoint. He doesn't expect her to just immediately dive for him, knocking out a few of his teeth. which I'd say is more evidence of this being his real face, alongside the fact that he starts bleeding from his nose. She pulls the same move again, running at him, dodging all of his bullets, and kicking him over the balcony, where he hangs on in the rain, begging her to pull him up. After everything he pulled, it's rich seeing him act like he can just say "game's over, I surrender." She says he must be crazier than she thought if he expects her to save him, and she lets him slip and fall to his death. The story ends with Holly traumatized from having to shoot the woman Black Mask freed from prison, and Catwoman's sister being institutionalized, none of them knowing if she'll ever recover. This was a solid enough storyline featuring this new interpretation of the character, and I think he carved himself a nice niche as a rival for Catwoman, because of course he wouldn't stay dead, and he'd reappear soon after in 2004 during the Bat Family crossover storyline War Games. But I think capping things off with his first supposed death is a good way to end this video, and I'll save my discussion for his return and takeover for a follow-up. Look at where he ended and how he began when I introduced him at the start of this video. As the baton was passed between different artists and writers, details of his design and origin were flipped or forgotten, to the point where he morphed into something completely different. Maybe because they felt he was forgotten or that his gimmick was run dry, they had an opportunity to use him for the role they needed in their story, which did give the name Black Mask the spotlight again. So even if you disagree with where they took him, you can't deny that people recognize and remember him most for the violence he perpetrated as this new incarnation. The cutthroat sadist who'd do anything to rule Gotham's criminal underworld alone.